Chosen one. Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Be careful who you try to bury. Some souls don't die in darkness, they germinate. You see, it's funny how people can spend so much energy plotting your isolation, thinking they're pulling off a master plan, when in reality, they just gave God uninterrupted access to you. It's almost poetic. They wanted you to vanish, but all they did was give your destiny some peace and quiet to load its next update. Psychologists say isolation can break the average person within 90 days. But chosen ones, isolation is our boot camp. It's where we stop bleeding for validation and start breathing divine revelation. While they were busy high-fiving each other over your supposed downfall, you were being reintroduced to the version of yourself that no longer fits into their small-minded storyline. And now, look at them. The same people who once whispered, "Nobody wants you," are choking on regret as the universe plays the plot twist they never saw coming. Their punishment turned into your promotion. The silence they used as a weapon became your sanctuary. The loneliness they thought would finish you became your initiation into power. It's the ultimate irony. They tried to exile you from relevance, but you walked out of isolation glowing like someone who discovered Wi-Fi in the wilderness, fully connected to God, fully upgraded, and absolutely untouchable. So let's talk about it. How their plan to isolate you backfired terribly, and why the regret they're choking on isn't just emotional. It's karmic. Number one, they thought isolation would break you, but it became your spiritual laboratory. They thought isolating you would destroy you. They thought cutting you off from people, opportunities, and support would break your spirit and make you crawl back begging for acceptance. But what they didn't know was that solitude is not the enemy of the chosen. It is the birthplace of revelation. When you were left alone, something powerful happened behind the scenes. The noise stopped, and for the first time in a long time, you could hear yourself again. You started to notice the difference between who you truly are and who you had to be to survive around them. The same silence that was supposed to suffocate you ended up becoming sacred space, a spiritual laboratory where your pain transformed into intelligence. Every lonely moment turned into a classroom. You started analyzing human behavior, your own patterns, and the invisible systems that had kept you trapped in small thinking. You realized you were never really alone. You were just removed from distractions that were drowning out your higher frequency. What they saw as punishment was actually purification. You were being detoxed from false validation, fake friendships, and the emotional parasites who fed off your light but never gave anything in return. While they were laughing and gossiping, thinking they'd successfully cut you off, you were busy being recalibrated by divine precision. The isolation stripped away the unnecessary and revealed the essential. It forced you to look inward, to strengthen your mind, to confront the parts of yourself that you had buried under years of people-pleasing and pretending. They tried to silence your voice, but they accidentally amplified your vision. You started to see through everything: motives, manipulation, energy. You became spiritually surgical. When you finally came out of that isolation, you were no longer the same person they plotted against. You walked out clearer, lighter, sharper, and deeply connected to purpose. And that's when the backfire began. Because now the version of you they tried to destroy no longer exists. Only the upgraded one does. Their attempt to weaken you became the reason you evolved. They created the isolation, but God turned it into incubation. And now they have to watch as the very environment they meant for your downfall became the soil that made you unstoppable. Number two, they wanted you unseen, but heaven put you under a different spotlight. They thought pushing you out of sight would erase your presence. They wanted you invisible, irrelevant, and forgotten. They believed that if nobody was talking about you, you'd lose your influence. But what they didn't understand is that being unseen by people doesn't mean being unseen by purpose. When heaven places its spotlight on someone, it doesn't depend on public approval or social visibility. It's spiritual, and it shines even in silence. While they worked hard to block your name from conversations, God was engraving it in the right hearts, in hidden places where it truly mattered. You were never erased, you were repositioned. God didn't remove you from the crowd to punish you. He hid you to protect what was still forming inside you. Because some destinies require privacy before presentation. You were being developed behind closed doors, gaining wisdom, strength, and emotional clarity that could never grow in noisy environments. The stage they thought they took away from you was never yours to begin with. Yours was built in the unseen, the place where character grows, discernment sharpens, and power matures. They mistook your absence for insignificance, but it was divine camouflage. The spotlight you were under wasn't artificial light. It was revelation light. Heaven was studying your heart, testing your loyalty, preparing your name for rooms you didn't even know existed. They thought they removed your audience, but God replaced it with alignment. While they sought attention, you sought direction, and that's what made the difference. They became performers, and you became purposeful. Now the same people who tried to erase your visibility are confused about why your presence still lingers. They see doors opening for you without understanding how, because they can't comprehend that divine timing isn't about who sees you. It's about who's watching over you. You were never forgotten. You were being formatted. God had to take you off their stage to place you on His. And now that your light is breaking through again, it's brighter, wiser, and untouchable. They hid you thinking it was the end, but heaven used that very moment to announce your beginning. They didn't realize they were never capable of dimming what God Himself intended to reveal. Number 3. Isolation didn't kill you. It edited you. They thought isolation would ruin you, but it actually edited you. The version of you that walked into that lonely season wasn't the same one that came out. When people cut you off, they thought they were removing your support system. But what they really did was remove distractions that were diluting your identity. In that stillness, you started seeing everything clearly, who you were pretending to be, what you were tolerating, and what parts of you needed to go. The silence became the scalpel that trimmed away the unnecessary. God used that solitude like an editor uses a red pen, cutting out the false sentences in your story that didn't belong to your true purpose. You started noticing that the old version of you was built around survival. You used to overextend yourself just to be accepted. You used to downplay your intelligence so others wouldn't feel small. You used to keep toxic people close just to avoid being alone. But when isolation came, it broke all those habits one by one. You stopped negotiating with disrespect. You stopped explaining your worth to people who were never trying to understand it. You stopped shrinking. Isolation didn't make you bitter. It made you precise. It showed you how much time you wasted trying to fix people who were committed to misunderstanding you. The loneliness hurt, but it had purpose. It was the divine editing process where everything that wasn't aligned with your next chapter had to go. You were being rewritten. Your mindset, your standards, your energy. The old scripts of guilt, fear, and self-doubt were deleted. In their place came clarity, confidence, and spiritual intelligence. And when you stepped back into the world, you didn't fit into the same environments anymore. You didn't chase the same conversations or crave the same validation. You had been rewritten from the inside out. Now, when those who tried to isolate you look at you, they can't recognize the person they once tried to break. You've outgrown their projections. Their tactics no longer work because you've edited out the weakness they used to exploit. What they saw as rejection was actually a divine revision. And the story that came out of it is far more powerful than the one they tried to erase. Number 4, they wanted you emotionally starved, but you learned to eat from spirit. They wanted you desperate for emotional crumbs, dependent on their validation just to feel seen. They assumed if they withdrew attention, affection, and connection, you'd collapse under the weight of loneliness. But something very different happened. Instead of starving, you started feasting on spirit. You learned how to draw strength from the invisible. You stopped chasing words of affirmation and started hearing divine confirmation. Their silence meant to punish you became the space where your soul started eating better food. Truth, revelation, and peace. You realized that emotional starvation is only deadly when you believe people are your source. Once you understood that energy, love, and wisdom flow from a higher place, their absence lost its power. You stopped sitting at tables where you had to beg for respect or perform for attention. You started nourishing yourself through stillness, prayer, and solitude. The emptiness they created became your sacred dining room, a place where you reconnected with your own spirit. That shift terrified them because your detachment exposed how dependent they were on being needed. They thrived when you looked to them for approval because it fed their ego. When you stopped caring about their opinions, they felt invisible in their own manipulation. The control they once had over your emotions vanished, and they couldn't handle the hunger pangs of irrelevance. You discovered that alignment is more sustaining than attention. You found peace in places they never searched, in quiet mornings, in divine whispers, in self-awareness. You no longer needed their gossip to feel included, or their validation to feel important. You learned how to feed your spirit directly from the source, and that nourishment gave you a glow they couldn't understand. Now when they see you, they're confused. How can someone they abandoned look so full? How can someone they deprived of love radiate so much peace? It's because you no longer live off emotional fast food. You dine on divine nutrition. You stop begging for crumbs when you realized you were seated at a higher table all along. And that's the kind of satisfaction they can't compete with, because it doesn't come from attention, it comes from awakening. Number 5. They mistook your silence for defeat. It was your recalibration phase. They thought your silence meant you were broken, defeated, and done. They mistook your withdrawal for weakness, not realizing it was the moment you switched from reaction to revelation. They didn't know that silence is where chosen ones reorganize their inner world. You weren't hiding, you were healing. You weren't ignoring life, you were integrating wisdom. While they laughed and celebrated your supposed fall, you were in the middle of a spiritual software update, deleting outdated emotions, clearing corrupted attachments, and installing new levels of discernment. Every quiet moment became a recalibration. Your thoughts were aligning with truth, your emotions were stabilizing, and your faith was recharging. You were learning how to respond from clarity instead of chaos. You stopped explaining yourself because you realized energy speaks louder than explanations. You were listening more than speaking, observing more than reacting, understanding more than defending. And that's what scared them. You went inward, and they lost access to your triggers. They had built their confidence around your emotional availability. Your reactions fed their sense of control. When you went quiet, they lost their map to manipulate you. Your silence made them feel irrelevant because they could no longer locate your weak spots. But what they didn't know was that your quiet season was your training ground. You were learning how to think like heaven, calmly, strategically, and divinely timed. You stopped fighting battles that didn't deserve your energy and started investing in the future that did. By the time they realized it wasn't defeat, but divine recalibration, you were already operating on a higher frequency. Their gossip couldn't reach you. Their assumptions couldn't touch you. You had outgrown their comprehension. The silence they mocked turned out to be the sound of your transformation. They waited for your downfall, not knowing you were downloading instructions for your next chapter. And when you finally reappeared, your energy carried authority. You moved differently. Steady, unbothered, divinely guided. They can't understand how the one they thought was finished came back refined. It's because your silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. You didn't disappear to lose. You disappeared to realign. Number 6, isolation revealed their true dependency on you. They truly believed that you couldn't make it without them. They thought your value depended on their presence, their approval, or their support. But isolation revealed something they never saw coming. You were never the one who was dependent. They were. You were their emotional supply, their source of validation, their quiet anchor when their own lives were falling apart. They used to drain your empathy, your patience, and your peace, all while convincing themselves they were the strong ones. When they pulled away, thinking they were teaching you a lesson, they accidentally removed their own oxygen mask. They didn't realize how much of their confidence was borrowed from your energy. You were the calm in their chaos, the mirror that reflected their better self, the grounding presence that made their dysfunction tolerable. Once you were gone, their inner world became loud again. The arguments got worse, the insecurities resurfaced, the masks slipped. They thought isolating you would make you crumble, but instead they started crumbling without the light you carried. That's why they watch you now with mixed emotions, anger, confusion, regret. They don't understand how you survived what they couldn't live without. The silence you endured became their loudest teacher. For the first time, they had to sit with their own emptiness. The same emptiness you had unknowingly been covering with your love, understanding, and patience. The withdrawal hit hard because they were never addicted to attention. They were addicted to your energy. You were the stability they pretended to possess. They called you weak, but your absence exposed their real fragility. Now they try to reconnect, not out of genuine remorse, but out of desperation to refill what they lost. But it doesn't work anymore because you've learned something vital. Your energy isn't free, and your light isn't for rent. You stopped being their battery, and that's why they're short-circuiting. The irony is painful for them. The same silence they used to break you became the silence that broke their illusion. They didn't just lose you. They lost the power source that made their darkness feel comfortable. And now their regret is not about missing you. It's about realizing how unlivable life feels without the energy they once took for granted. Number 7, you became the proof that human abandonment can't cancel divine appointment. Their rejection was supposed to end you. They thought walking away would erase your relevance, silence your voice, and strip you of purpose. They thought your story was over the moment they stopped showing up. But the truth is, their departure was the divine signal for your next chapter to begin. When people abandoned you, heaven didn't panic. It prepared. Because divine purpose isn't written in pencil. It's carved in spiritual permanence. No human decision can rewrite what God already authored about your life. At first it hurt deeply. You questioned your worth, your timing, even your purpose. But somewhere in that pain, you realized something sacred. The absence of people didn't mean the absence of God. The emptiness they left behind became a meeting place between you and the divine. You learned that destiny doesn't need a crowd to be confirmed. It only needs obedience. And when you started walking in that understanding, everything shifted. You stopped trying to convince people to stay and started recognizing that some exits are divine strategies, not personal failures. Their rejection became revelation. It exposed how much power you had given to temporary people over a permanent calling. It forced you to see that what's ordained for you doesn't need external validation to come alive. God used their absence as proof that your life's direction isn't controlled by human loyalty, but by divine appointment. The very ones who tried to dismiss you unknowingly made space for your expansion. They didn't end your story. They edited themselves out of it. Now you've become living evidence of spiritual sovereignty. You're proof that human approval is optional when divine assignment is active. You didn't need their apology to evolve, and you didn't need their support to rise. What they thought was your expiration date turned out to be your activation moment. You were never waiting for their return. You were waiting for your recognition. And now your existence tells a story that silences doubt. Every success, every breakthrough, every ounce of peace you now carry stands as proof that rejection doesn't equal reduction. You didn't just survive abandonment, you transcended it. Because when man disowns what God anoints, heaven doesn't cancel the mission, it upgrades it. Number 8, they tried to humiliate you privately, but God made their guilt public. They wanted to humiliate you in silence, to tarnish your name where no one could defend you. They thought if they whispered enough lies behind closed doors, your reputation would crumble quietly. They wanted to see you isolated, embarrassed, and stripped of dignity. But divine law doesn't let deceit stay hidden forever. What they sowed in secret started growing roots of exposure. The very words they used to destroy you turned into the rope that revealed their own intentions. They didn't just get caught, they got convicted by their own gossip. The irony is poetic. The same mouths that once spread lies now struggle to speak your name without shame. Every rumor they started became a mirror that reflected their jealousy, their insecurity, and their obsession. The tables didn't just turn, they flipped violently. The story reversed so fast that now the same people who mocked you can't stop watching you. The same ones who said you'd never rise are forced to witness your growth unfold right before their eyes, and it's breaking them in silence. You didn't have to defend yourself because truth has a timing that exposes falsehood effortlessly. God didn't just clear your name, He made your elevation the evidence. You became a walking contradiction to their lies. Every success, every peaceful day, every ounce of joy you now carry screams louder than their slander ever could. The universe made sure that their words aged poorly, while your actions matured beautifully. And that's a punishment more powerful than revenge. Now they're stuck in the tension of regret, unable to undo the narrative they created, yet forced to watch you thrive in real time. They thought their gossip would discredit you, but it ended up disqualifying them. People started seeing through their projections, realizing that their hatred was never about truth, but about envy disguised as concern. Their regret is the testimony they tried to silence. You don't need to say a word. Their own conscience is doing the talking now. The more you rise, the heavier their guilt becomes. And the sweetest justice in all of it is this: the private humiliation they planned for you became the public revelation of their character. God didn't just vindicate you. He made their shame the spotlight. Number 9. They isolated you because your spirit made them feel exposed. They didn't isolate you because you were a problem. They isolated you because your presence revealed the problem. Your spirit carried too much truth, too much awareness, too much light. You didn't even need to confront them. Just being around you made their masks slip. They could no longer hide behind charm, manipulation, or performance. Because your energy was like a mirror that showed people exactly who they were beneath the surface. That kind of presence is both magnetic and threatening. People crave your light, but also fear what it exposes. Your authenticity made them uncomfortable. You didn't play the social games that everyone else played. The fake smiles, the polite lies, the silent betrayals. You moved with honesty, integrity, and discernment. And that alone made people nervous. When someone carries that kind of purity, it disrupts anything built on illusion. So rather than change, they chose to isolate you. That was their coping mechanism. Distance themselves from the mirror that reflected their duplicity. Deep down, they knew you saw them clearly. You could sense the envy, the lies, the manipulation, things they'd kept hidden from others for years. You noticed what most people ignored. Not because you were suspicious, but because your spirit was trained to detect energy that doesn't match words. And when someone sees through masks that others depend on to survive, it creates fear. That fear turned into avoidance, and that avoidance became your isolation. But what they called rejection was actually spiritual confirmation. They couldn't handle your frequency, not because it was wrong, but because it was real. You are the kind of presence that exposes imbalance just by existing. When your spirit walks into a room, pretense trembles. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. You carry too much truth for spaces built on deceit to feel comfortable around you. So, they distanced themselves thinking they were protecting their peace. But really, they were avoiding conviction. They couldn't manipulate you, flatter you, or confuse you. You saw through it all. And rather than face their own reflection, they tried to erase the mirror. But the beautiful twist is that your isolation only proved what your intuition already knew. They were never rejecting you. They were retreating from truth. Number 10, what they called abandonment. Heaven called an audit. What they called abandonment was never really about rejection. It was a divine audit. God wasn't punishing you. He was reviewing your connections. Every person who walked away was part of a spiritual accounting process, revealing who was truly for you and who was secretly against you. It wasn't about loneliness. It was about accuracy. God doesn't bless confusion, and He won't allow contaminated energy to travel with you into your next level. So when people started disappearing, it wasn't a coincidence. It was clearance. Heaven was cleaning your circle not to hurt you, but to free you. At first, it felt like loss. You questioned why certain people turned cold, why relationships suddenly fell apart, and why those you trusted most seemed to vanish without warning. But as time passed, you began to notice something deeper. Every exit revealed something that presence had been hiding. Their departure exposed the truth that their loyalty was conditional, their respect was performative, and their love was self-serving. They were attached to your benefits, not your being. And God saw what you couldn't see while blinded by emotion. The audit wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. It showed you who drained you, who deceived you, and who disguised themselves as supporters while secretly hoping for your downfall. The isolation was heaven's way of balancing your spiritual books, removing emotional debts, closing unpaid chapters, and correcting energetic imbalances. You didn't lose anyone who was meant to stay. You simply lost illusions that were never meant to last. By the time the audit was complete, your soul's balance sheet was lighter, clearer, and far more valuable. The people who left made room for alignment, for genuine souls who see you, not just what they can take from you. You realize that what looked like subtraction was actually multiplication in disguise. Fewer people, but more peace. Less noise, but more purpose. Now, when you look back, you understand that heaven never takes away without upgrading what remains. The audit wasn't personal. It was preparation. And when it ended, you came out wealthier in spirit, stronger in discernment, and surrounded only by those who passed the test. What they called abandonment turned out to be divine reorganization, and your soul came out in profit. Number 11. They thought you'd lose your voice, but you found your frequency. They thought cutting you off would silence you. They thought removing your platform, your support, your audience would erase your influence. But what they didn't understand is that divine voices don't operate through microphones. They operate through frequency. You were never designed to speak on a human volume level. Your message was built to travel through spirit. So, when they muted your environment, they unintentionally tuned you into your higher bandwidth. Silence became your amplifier. Isolation wasn't an interruption, it was calibration. When no one was listening, heaven was. You stopped trying to be understood, and you began to transmit. Your words transformed from communication to vibration. You no longer needed applause or validation. You became frequency itself, untraceable, unbreakable, and unreachable to anyone who operates in noise. See, your voice was never meant to echo in shallow rooms. It was meant to resonate through dimensions. And that's exactly what happened when everything went quiet. You discovered that true sound doesn't come from the throat. It comes from alignment. The more you healed, the clearer your signal became. The less you chased validation, the purer your tone grew. You started speaking energy before language, and even without saying a word, people began feeling you. Now your presence alone communicates what your words once carried. The same people who tried to mute you are now haunted by your vibration. Because you no longer speak from pain, but from power. They can't block a frequency that transcends their wavelength. You evolved from voice to vibration, from noise to resonance, from influence to impact. They thought your silence meant defeat, but all it did was refine your signal. You found your divine frequency, that rare tone that pierces illusions, awakens souls, and shakes hidden foundations. And that frequency, it can't be censored, silenced, or simulated. It travels beyond their gossip, their control, and their comprehension. They tried to end your sound, but you became sound itself. The living echo of heaven's truth vibrating through human form. Number 12, they created distance, and that's exactly what exposed their dependence. They thought creating distance would give them power. They believed removing you would leave you gasping for their attention, crawling back for scraps of acknowledgement. But distance has a funny way of flipping the mirror. It doesn't just show who was strong enough to walk away. It shows who was secretly leaning the hardest. And when that space expanded, it exposed something they weren't ready to face. You weren't the dependent one. They were. They didn't realize how much stability your energy provided until you were no longer there to absorb their emotional static. You were their calm in disguise, the silent order in their chaos. Your energy balanced rooms, diffused tensions, and masked dysfunction. Without you, their emotional architecture began to crumble. Their tempers got shorter, their peace evaporated. Their relationships started malfunctioning. They thought they were teaching you a lesson in detachment, but what they really did was cut off their own power source. See, when you carry healing energy, people mistake it for weakness. They think your compassion makes you dependent, not realizing that your love is their medication. You are the emotional regulator, quietly detoxing atmospheres that were poisoned long before you entered them. So when they removed you, the toxins surfaced. Suddenly they couldn't stand themselves. They started replaying moments where they mocked your softness, forgetting that your softness was their shield. That's the paradox of the chosen. You don't realize how much light you bring until your absence becomes the darkness people trip over. They thought distance would make you disappear, but it only revealed how hollow their structure was without your spirit holding it up. You didn't lose anything. You simply stopped subsidizing their imbalance. Now, the very people who thought they were protecting their pride are choking on regret. They're discovering that peace was never in control. It was in connection. And that connection, it was you. The distance they created has become their mirror, one that reflects their dependence more clearly than your presence ever could. Number 13. Isolation forced you to discover the supernatural version of yourself. Isolation has a strange way of stripping you down until only truth remains. When everyone disappeared, when the phone stopped ringing, and the crowd that once fed your self-worth vanished, something divine began to emerge from the silence. You didn't just survive isolation. You met the version of yourself that was never dependent on validation. You met the supernatural you. All your life, you were taught to measure your worth through what others mirrored back to you. Family approval, friends' acceptance, society's standards. But when isolation came, It shattered every illusion that wasn't authentically yours. Suddenly, there was no one left to clap for you, no one to affirm your choices, no one to translate your purpose. And that's when the voice of God grew louder. Isolation didn't make you lose connection. It cleared the static. What felt like abandonment was actually calibration. Heaven turning down the world's volume so you could hear your true frequency. In that silence, you realized you were never just a body trying to fit in. You were a spirit training to stand out. You started seeing yourself not as someone who lost everything, but as someone who finally shed the unnecessary. You were stripped of dependency, of people-pleasing, of pretending. The loneliness they thought would destroy you actually detoxed you from everything artificial. And then it happened. That supernatural version of you surfaced. The one that doesn't flinch under pressure. The one that senses energy before words. The one that doesn't pray for escape, but for endurance. You became spiritually self-sufficient, sustained by revelation, not recognition. You realized you didn't need people to make you whole. You needed solitude to meet your source. When they left, it wasn't rejection, it was revelation. Because isolation is where the chosen learn their true strength. Not the strength to fight back, but the strength to remain unbothered, unmoved, and unstoppable. You found the power that can't be taught, the faith that can't be faked, and the identity that can't be taken. They thought they left you empty, but isolation revealed that you were never meant to be filled by people. You were designed to overflow with divinity. Number 14. Their plan backfired because they misread the equation. Isolation plus faith equals multiplication. They thought taking people away from you would shrink you. They genuinely believed that isolating you would equal weakening you, that subtracting support would automatically cancel your growth. But what they didn't understand is that God doesn't follow human equations. In divine mathematics, subtraction doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it's the setup for multiplication. Isolation wasn't your punishment, it was your preparation. When they removed themselves, it looked like a setback. The crowd got smaller, the noise went quiet, the opportunities seemed to fade. But underneath all that stillness, something was growing. The absence they created became the atmosphere God used to reconfigure your purpose. Because faith doesn't multiply in comfort, it multiplies in confinement. It grows in the dark, in the uncelebrated places, in the seasons where nobody claps or checks in. You became like a seed, buried, not dead. Every chosen one understands that divine growth often looks like disappearance at first. The ground doesn't reveal what's germinating beneath it. And while they thought you were finished, you were developing roots, a spiritual system strong enough to sustain the next level of expansion. That's the part they misread. They saw isolation as exile, but heaven saw it as incubation. They thought silence would shrink your impact. Instead, it multiplied your clarity. They thought distance would kill your influence. Instead, it deepened your reach. They thought absence would erase your name. Instead, it engraved your purpose into eternity. Every calculation they made was built on the wrong formula. They forgot that when faith enters the equation, the rules of the natural world stop applying. Now you're blossoming in the very soil they buried you in. You're growing without permission, succeeding without validation, and shining without their spotlight. That's why they're uneasy, because they're watching the supernatural law they never believed in unfold before their eyes. They subtracted your connections, but didn't realize you were connected to the source. They removed your audience, but God became your amplifier. Their plan backfired because they miscalculated your foundation. You were never powered by popularity, you were powered by purpose. And when faith is the variable, isolation doesn't divide you. It multiplies you beyond their understanding. Everything they did to bury you became the blueprint for your resurrection. They thought isolation would silence you, but it actually synchronized you with heaven's rhythm. Every attempt to break you became the pressure that refined you. What they called exile was really elevation in disguise. You didn't just survive separation, you evolved through it. The version of you that walked into isolation isn't the one that walked out. You went in searching for connection. You came out carrying divine conviction. Now you see why it all had to happen exactly as it did. The silence that once scared you became your sanctuary. The distance that felt like rejection became your classroom. The loneliness they weaponized became the womb of your awakening. You learned how to eat from spirit, how to live from revelation, and how to grow in places that weren't designed to nurture you. That's not luck. That's divine architecture. God didn't just sustain you through isolation. He expanded you through it. And here's the poetic justice. While they were busy watching to see if you'd fall, you were busy learning how to fly. Their absence taught you who you are, without the noise, without the validation, without the crowd. You no longer depend on what left, because what stayed, your faith, your fire, your focus, was all you ever needed. The isolation they cursed you with became your greatest investment, and now they have no choice but to witness the return on that investment. A version of you that no longer fits in their old narrative. The tables didn't just turn, they transformed. You became the evidence that divine purpose doesn't crumble under isolation, it multiplies through it. And now, every whisper of regret they carry is just confirmation that you graduated from their manipulation. You didn't lose people, you lost parasites. You didn't lose support, you lost distractions. You didn't lose time, you gained alignment. So when you look back, don't see isolation as punishment, see it as promotion. Because it didn't just reveal who they were, it revealed who you are. The chosen one who can't be subtracted from destiny, only multiplied through faith. Amen.